Welcome to the Christina Crooks Show, where you not only get to know the many versions of moi, but also the rich tapestry of humanity. I invite you to bring your full curiosity and listen as we journey through people's stories and expertise. I hope you walk away with insights and inspiration and new possibilities bubbling up inside of your soul. The reason it's called the Christina Crooks Show is because here's the thing. I don't always want to do the same thing. I like a variety in my life. I like to explore different rabbit holes and different people and different interests. So together in this podcast, that's exactly what we'll do. Have fun, and we'll see you soon. Here we are today on the Christina Crooks Show with B. Alink. B is a Dutch engineer, woodworker, and restoration architect. She was born and raised in the Netherlands and spent 10 years on community reconstruction in Kenya, the Sudan, Ethiopia, Indonesia, Kosovo, and Afghanistan. In 2008, she immigrated to Canada. B is the founder and inventor of the Alinker, a three-wheeled walking bike she refers to as a vehicle of change. The Alinker, which is not built for a body with a problem, but for who we are, active and engaged. B is a gender weirdo and has often been called crazy. People told her to focus and to comply, but she doesn't fit in with us. She just held true to her vision that the world needs something else for and by all of us. No one excluded. B focuses on who we are, not what we have. With insane tenacity, commitment, and dedication, B has built her company into a movement of people showing up for each other. B employs Alink users, which would otherwise be unemployed, pays them all a living wage, and the Alinker has become a certified B-Corp. She's a ShEO venture, is more than carbon neutral and practically plastic free. The Alinker company is built to create access to health by building access to mobility, community, and healthy food. Hoot hat het B.
Hoot hat het? Het hat goed?
Het hat het.
Get here. This is wild. You started the Dutch language here. What's happening?
My friends, I know. Welcome to the show, B. I'm so excited for you to be here. There are so many things that I wanted us to talk about. Like we spoke a little bit before we came here, and one of the things that we want to go over is the importance of language. And as an ontologist, ontology is the art and science of being human. And it comes down to linguistics. A good one is for people that have a challenging disorder or something that's characterized as that. And you work with a lot of people with MS. So they might say, I have MS, or a better example is I am depressed versus I'm feeling depressed. That small distinction in language.
I suffer from MS versus I live with the symptoms of MS. I have MS, but MS doesn't have me. That's literally used by quite a few.
Yes. Because people can identify with it as though it's a part of their identity and that's who they are, versus this is something I experience and symptoms I have. So we're going to go into some of that. But the first thing I really want to talk about is becoming a B Corp. Like, holy cow, that is so not easy to gain status as a certified B Corp.
And to maintain that status.
Right.
For people that don't know what a B Corp is, becoming a certified B Corp means that you take the online assessment sheet and the essence of the company, that you don't just make money, but that you measure impact differently. So the triple bottom line, social impact, environmental impact, and then also impact in financial returns. But you have to build into your companies and your company statements that the rights of your investors are not to ask for money if you decide to reinvest gains into making the company more sustainable, having better environmental practices, et cetera, et cetera. So it's quite a real thing and with a quite real effect to companies. And it's understanding that you can use your company as a force for good. Now, how do you measure that? How do you measure social and environmental impact? And that's always problematic because it's the soft side of things and you can't measure that in hard money. Well, you can, but that's a whole other issue, I think. And I've got some ideas about that, of course. But the online assessment sheet from B Corp, anybody can start an assessment. And what it did to me in the beginning, because this is the 4th year that we're certified. So we already recertified once too. But I used the assessment sheet the moment I started the company, or even before that, I think, to using the questions of the assessment sheet to wake me up. It's like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. That's a great question. I'm going to see what I can do to. So I built my company consciously based on best practices and how to use your company as a vehicle for change, as a force for good, as the B Corp community talks about it. And that's important to me because if I were in the business of selling bikes, like kill me now, I'm not interested. Like seriously not. If I would sell soap, I'd talk about exactly the same systemic stuff that I'm talking about now with the bike. So it's not about selling the bike. It's about how we can use our business to be a voice in creating a world that's a little bit more livable. And the problem that I have with B Corp, because I always have problems with existing systems, especially because B Corp was ever created by 3 white guys. They do have a certain mindset because they are conditioned in a certain way in the system. And the foundation, so the recertification was problematic for me because you have to measure and you have to prove the things that you improve on. I don't believe you should be improving. I think you should build your company to be completely inclusive, to not cause those problems that the current system has caused. Right now, as long as it's focused on fixing the problems of the existing system because it was exclusive, because it wasn't diverse, because it was only the pay gap between men, women, and Indigenous people were not involved, et cetera, that were all problems that were created by a system that was not designed for all of us. I'm not interested in fixing the problems of that system that wasn't designed for us. That system wasn't designed for us. That should give you a clue.
Yeah. And there's a quote, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact verbatim quote or even who said it, but it's kind of become a cliche now that you can't solve today's problems with the system that created the problem in the first place.
Yeah.
You just can't. It has to completely transform into something else. And I often go back to be in the space of cliches. I go back to the butterfly. And the butterfly it's not a worm or a caterpillar that grows wings. It completely disintegrates into goo with just a tube to breathe outside of the cocoon. And then when it reorganizes itself and reorganizes its cells, it turns into a butterfly. But that's why it's so synonymous with transformation, because transformation is not the same as change. And I think a lot of times when we're talking about systems, especially in business, the reference points become change, not transformation. And for someone like yourself, right down to the glasses you wear. For those of you that are listening to us, you can't see B, but you'll see it on her picture. She wears eyeglasses that have a circle and a square. And I just love that you represent contrast. I perceive you as someone who really represents contrast and represents taking in all the parts of yourself and being okay with who you are, regardless of what the systems and the narratives tell you you should be.
Mhm. But I think so many people are dismissed by this system because it was not designed to be inclusive and for all of us, right?
Right.
And so the system has created minorities, and now we all identify as minorities. They even managed to get women in the non. "No, we're not a minority here," but they managed to get women to be an underrepresented group and to be an underserved group. That's what that system does. It's ableist, sexist, and racist by nature. So it doesn't want to be fixed either. That system does exactly what it needs to do, is make some white guys very rich. And by us identifying as minorities, feeling small and powerless now because we're all fighting for our own little rights in our minority, we don't get anywhere. I don't live in that world. I don't identify with any minority. I live in a world where I am part of a vast majority of diverse people that just want to live a happy life. There's, in my mind, there's one minority that creates a bit of a problem for the rest. They happen to have the money and the power. That's why we don't think of them as a minority, but as a mainstream. But that's not, mainstream is not the majority of people.
Hmm.
And it definitely excludes a lot of people. So I live in a world with one minority that creates a problem, and we are all part of a vast majority of diverse people that just want to live happily.
I
That's not
agree.
divisive, right?
One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about today, as a woman entrepreneur that has created a three-wheeled walking bike for people that have mobility challenges but want to remain active. Just to reiterate, you've been doing this 12 years, I think now?
It's the
10?
10th year. Yeah, it took
It's
me
the
four
10th
and a
year.
half years to prototype, and this is the 6th year in the market. Yeah.
Got it. So that's not, I know from my own journey of entrepreneurship, it is not easy. And when you're trying to bring a product to market, that's a whole other level. And then if you're doing it in the medical industry, that's a whole other layer. So
And
you,
we're not.
yeah,
I'm doing it in the bike world,
got it.
male-dominated
Right.
world. But you're in the medical field because everybody who gets an Alinker generally has some kind of medical thing going on that
Right.
causes challenges in mobility or walking differently or whatever. But we're not in the medical field. We're not a medical device. But
Gotcha.
yes, we are in the in the business that I have literally been asked by investors or other people that thought they could say something like, shouldn't you hire a real engineer? I was like, what? That not once that happens. That happens.
Yeah. So being in this, doing all this for the last 10 years, and I know you've had experiences before that, but so that I keep myself on track within that realm in the last decade, how do you manage to continue to stay in a space of really trusting that you're making the choices that are right for you, making the choices that are right for the company, and doing things that continue to remain in your own uniqueness and manage your self care with the responsibilities of running a business? What do your days look like? What does that look like?
I hang out with my cat. I eat healthy. I, I have I play music. That music I just went to a concert and I hang out with people. I talk a lot to people. And then there's a whole lot of stuff happening in my head with reinventing the company. What does it look like if we just eradicate international shipping, which is an issue that you now can address post pandemic? But before I venture off to all that kind of stuff, your question was, because there were many questions there, but what,
There were.
yes,
The
how
main
do you,
question is how do you manage your own self-care? That's really the one I want to highlight within all those responsibilities in running a global company. But I
that's
think you kind of answered that. I love the priority level too, that cat is first.
cat
We have
first,
5.
hands down, cats down. Like hands down, cats is first. Yeah.
I know. They remind us that nothing else matters.
Yes. And you've got something to care for. Like I haven't had the life free. I had cats before I left the Netherlands because I was raised in the Netherlands. And then I didn't have cats for the 10 years international work. It's just, you don't take an animal in Afghanistan, for example. There were always animals around here and there, but it wasn't my pet. And then there was a rescue that popped up in my field. And somebody told me, this is yours. And I was like, but I don't like that. She was like, no, no, you deserve love. Get a cat. This is yours. I was like, okay. And she's adorable. And it's been 4 months now or something. And I am so much happier since she's living in my house and she's taking control and owns the house and I'm just serving her or something. But I'm so much happier with her just being around. Little rescue cat. She's cute. But yeah, so cat first, and that took a lot to get there. The 10 years that I've been doing the Alinker has, it started when I came back from 10 years international work with full PTSD that I had no idea about. Because when you live in Afghanistan, there's a little bomb that goes off. There's always the fear like there's a bigger bomb going off. You're always the weirdo in an environment where you're not, where you're always the outsider in a community. And there's always that elevated level of adrenaline, like, is there a rocket coming to our house? Is there this? Is there that? Like, are you driving in the road? You've got security things around you. You're always alert. So there's an elevated level that becomes normal. And then you've seen things that nobody should see, experience things that nobody should experience, all that stuff. So after 10 years, I didn't know that I had PTSD. That landed me in a relationship that wasn't very healthy because the, the state of the relationship gave me that elevated adrenaline because Canada
Makes
is
sense.
really boring,
That's pretty
right?
common.
Right. So I looked for the elevated stress in the relationship that was not the timing and whatever, having quite aggressive menopause, and she had too. That didn't work. Anyway, so that's how it, in that state I started. And there's been years of alcohol and antidepressants and not wanting to live. That was the first years. Quitting my job because I needed more time and more money. Creating the company because now I needed investors. And always living at the traumatic scarcity of never having the resources or the self-care to do anything. It shifted when Vicky called me from ShEO saying, you were selected as one of the ventures. And I cried. I was like, now things are going to change. But it's been fucking hard. There's no other term for it. And I always say that the Alinker nearly killed me as well as it kept me alive because I saw what the prototypes, what the potential I could see in the future with what I experienced when people got on prototypes. I was like, holy crap, if that happens, then that means that that could happen for so many more people. If all the medical devices in the medical industry is focused on liability, avoiding risks, please get used to the wheelchair. Here's your medication, and at least nothing will happen to you. It's because you won't fall on your face, so to speak. That's what the medical world is focused on, not on who we are, but what we have, a body with a problem.
Yeah. Well, and one of the most profound things that you've said to me in the past when we spoke a few years ago was I had asked you at the time, have you thought about bringing the a linker into the medical system? And you said no, because I said in the US. And you said no, because the US doesn't have a medical system, it has a sick care system. And that really stuck with me because throughout the last few years, I've really looked at different alternative answers to medicine and been really interested in indigenous ways and really interested in shamanism and these ways that have been around for thousands of years and mix that with modern medicine. And it's interesting, but a lot of, especially in the US, modern medicine is run by corporations and it's run by profits and it's run by capitalism. And the longer and more people stay sick, the more these companies make money. And pharmaceutical companies are so intertwined with politics and our food that it's really, you dig into it and it starts getting a bit conspiracy theory esque, but it's also quite true. A lot of
Just
it.
follow the
And
money. You know what's happening. Like 95% of the products in the supermarket are owned by less than 10 brands. Those
Mhm.
same brands have huge stake in the pharma industry. The food industry makes us sick and feeds the pharma industry. We don't want people to be independent of the sick care industry and independent of medication because that's where it makes money. Pharma is
and
one of the highest net profit businesses in the world.
And what's really interesting is that turns into cultural dynamics
Mhm.
in that w- when people are, which I don't want to go too far down politics,
Everything
things
is
are,
politics. So go.
what's really interesting is that, if you look at the different parties, I used to be someone that was really for social programs and things like that. But as I get older, I start to see how actually a lot of those social programs tend to keep people stuck. They tend to keep them
So
small.
patronizing.
Exactly. And it's the same kind of thing of like, if you keep people needing something,
Yeah.
then they will continue to need it and they won't break free from those chains.
And if you don't address power dynamics, you can say like, I want to empower Indigenous people. Who the crap am I that I can empower Indigenous? They don't need me to empower them. Thank you very much. I don't need to be empowered by some white guys, for example. I'd like to be respected for one of the human beings on this planet that needs respect, regardless. What every human being needs respect.
Yes. And I'll tell you how much that resonates with me. I had met someone that I had become a little more than acquaintances, but not quite close friends with, kind of that space between colleagues almost in some ways that is in the Indigenous community. And I said something like that. I really want to help the Indigenous community. And I didn't realize how condescending and belittling
Oh,
that comes off
who
at.
are you? Have you even questioned yourself? That's
Right.
the thing. Like, if you say I want to help people, I don't believe in helping people. People say like, so great that you're helping us. Like, I'm not actually. What I'm doing is helping myself, if anything, because I needed a community that I've created with the Alinker because I didn't find a community that I was happy in. There's not much nice out there. So I created this community for myself in the first place. Like, I've had that during international work that people said, "Oh, it's so amazing that you come and help us." It's like, I'm not helping you. You might feel that, together we can do more, but I'm not helping you. Forget that. Donors don't give the money unless there is a Khariji in Afghanistan, which means foreigner, to funnel the money through and to project and manage the project. But I'm not here to help you. I know something, you know something, your country needs to be rebuilt. And I can buffer between the donor requirements because they're painful and that we actually need to build schools. I'll buffer that. So you don't have to deal with those donor requirements that are ridiculous very often or very condescending. Like, what is that? Oh my God, the name slipped me. But instead of salary, you say, oh, cash for work, cash for labor, something like that. It's like cash for labor. That's a salary to me. Stop owing that cash for labor because it's belittling. You give people a few dollars and you don't need to pay minimum wages because now you call it cash for. There's a different term for it, but anyway. And so I always said like, no, I wasn't happy in the Netherlands when I came to Kenya. I needed to make myself happy again. And I came to a country where I'm actually a little bit more in a community where I'm like, "Oh, I get it a lot more here than I understand in the Netherlands." The connection with death. I need to feel the connection with death. My father died when I was 8, and it taught me how to live. The fact that we're trying to deny death as if it doesn't exist. Ooh, we can't talk about that. Ooh, euthanasia. Ooh, like all that stuff that makes it like ooh, is is only resulting in that we don't know how to live.
I
Because
totally agree.
death
I
is part
totally
of
agree.
life. And if people like around the death of my dad, people disappeared. The whole family disappeared for 2 years at least. And as an 8-year-old girl, I understood. I remember thinking like, oh, they don't know what to say. We
Yeah.
didn't know what to say, but why can you not just be quiet with each other and just grieve in the moment? Why do you need to fix shit? Like, grieving is not a problem to fix. You just need the space and time and allowance to grieve. If we can't grieve, we're suffering. That's what suffering is. If you can't let out what you naturally want to express, then you
100%.
suffer the death of somebody. But if we can grieve in community and without trying to fix it, and there's no pattern to grieving, it's not like first we're in denial, and then we get mad, and then we get like all that stuff, and then you should be done with it in half a year. Like, you're still talking about that, but your dad died like 50 years ago. You're still talking about your dad. It's like grieving doesn't end. It becomes part of life because it is part of life. The fact that we're dying makes life
worth living.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. If death doesn't happen, life is meaningless. I read a book from Simone de Beauvoir, Nobody's Immortal. I
Mm,
think that would be the English translation. It's an old book, of course, Simone de Beauvoir. And I read that book and I was like, oh my God, immortality is insane because nothing matters anymore. Everything loses its power because the love of your life, there might be a few and then it loses its value. For
right.
example, other
Right.
people die off.
When something has an expiration date, you have much more awareness of its impermanence.
Exactly. So by trying to eradicate that, when capitalism, I think, colonialism, capitalism, and that whole industrial revolution thing, we were separated. We separated ourselves from nature. That's, I think, where we become the sort of Ubermens of that we thought we could control everything. Something went wrong there because that's really not very fruitful because
Well,
it
and I,
drives us into death.
yeah, when you're talking about our connection with nature, it brings me back to what I was saying a few minutes ago about this Indigenous friend I had and saying I wanted to help the Indigenous people, and then being really put in my place of like, what that meant and how it was coming across, and realizing that is not at all how I want to impact someone else. And it made me dig deeper into what I was really looking for. And it was that in, at least in Lakota communities, Lakota, Nakota, Dakota,
Mhm.
even in those three communities, which are all very similar but different, in white colonialism, we called those three tribes the Sioux. And to the Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota, that's actually derogatory because it's a white word. And we don't necessarily know these things because they are not taught to us. But when we get close, when we lean in close to people that are different from us, we can learn those things better. And as I dug deeper, I realized I was looking for community. I was looking for connection,
Meaning in life.
meaning.
Right.
I was looking for connection to nature and these old ways, because in American culture, we don't necessarily have deep roots to old ways. We're not passing down stories with grandparents passing down stories of old ways that are teaching allegorical lessons and things of that nature. That's just not the way that the culture I'm aware of in American culture works. There's all kinds of dysfunction and codependencies and stuff like that. And it's very, are you familiar with the Hofstede model?
I know the Hussies from the Catholic Church.
Well, there's this research that's around something called the Hofstede model. It's Hofstede, and it rates different countries based on six different characteristics.
Oh,
And
yes.
it's very interesting.
Yes. Yes.
And it's for the listeners, for the US culture, we are a very individualistic and very masculine culture. So we're really, really focused on results, and we're really focused on the individual, and we're really focused on competition. And competition can be in direct contrast to collaboration and connection and being part of a tribe and a community. So
Mm.
as you were sharing the pieces you were sharing about nature, it's been a real journey for me the last couple of years to not just be connected externally with nature in a bigger
Mm.
way,
Mhm.
but my own nature. And we've been sold this myth that we are somehow separate from all that is and all that isn't.
Mhm.
And we're
We
not.
we have lost our souls in a system where we measure everything in money and status. We don't resonate with that. Our deep knowing, I believe, our deep knowing dies because it doesn't. We constantly traumatize ourselves in a system where we buy our food in plastic, where we have to put stuff in the microwave. No, you don't have to, and I don't. But like where the norm is, you buy some pre-processed food that nobody understands anymore, whether it's actually food or not, and it's not. And then shove it in the microwave and you eat that. That's actually constantly traumatizing your deep knowing of what is nourishing food. Not
Yes.
not healthy food, not diet food or something.
Well, and let's dig into that for a minute and unpack that deep knowingness. I call the inspired ideas that come out of that space whispers. And I find if I'm out of alignment with what I'm eating, with how I'm spending my time, I'm not getting enough quiet or enough time playing with my cats, little things like this that make life really purposeful and worth living. Time in nature, I can pull myself away from some of those knowings. So what are some things that you do creatively that keep bringing you back to that knowingness?
Thanking the food, being aware, and being aware that what I eat isn't a live plant. I eat completely plant based, no processed, no animal products. But with every piece of vegetable that I cut or put in the juicer or put in the pan or eat as a salad, I'm aware that this was a living being that nourishes me. And I thank it. I'm grateful for the food that I eat. And I think the simple awareness, mindfulness, whatever you can call that, is a practice. These are things that don't come as like, oh, I just need to be aware. It's like, no, awareness is a constant practice. It's a
Yes,
constant decision you make. And the more you make it, the easier it is to be in practice of awareness. But the awareness of what I'm eating is something alive, changes everything about eating.
I agree. When was the last time you had an experience where you were out of that consciousness, out of that awareness, out of that connectedness?
Oh my God, not anymore, but in the past, I've reverted back to alcohol. Even if it's just one glass, it feels crap. And I beat myself up like, oh my God, that is so stupid. I really don't believe alcohol is anything good. And so, but we live in an extreme alcohol culture. Actually, I call it an alcohol cult because there's huge peer pressure to drink. If you don't drink, you're asked, like, why don't you drink? And then when I say, shouldn't the question be, why do you drink? All of a sudden, you're persona non grata because you're too uncomfortable to have around. We're not inviting you for dinner anymore. I had a bunch of friends that only wanted to have breakfast with me because that's when they didn't have a beer yet.
Yeah.
Literally. I mean, and then when you're out of the cult, when you leave the cult, I say you don't drink alcohol anymore. You're out of the cult. You're dismissed.
Right. You're kind of an
Literally.
outsider. Yeah.
Yes, it is a cult. And so I know that a lot more people starting to wake up to like, why is alcohol legal? And to the extent that so many people suffer from directly alcohol or the results of alcohol, domestic abuse, like all that stuff is all alcohol driven. Why is it so legal and why is it so available? Because it's a cult.
I have a question that is totally in alignment with what you're saying, but not at all a question I thought I would be asking you today.
Hmm.
What do you think about the fact that alcohol is legal, but then things like marijuana or psilocybin mushrooms or ayahuasca are really illegal in many places, especially in the States?
Because they open your mind. And that's a threat to the system. That's the short answer. Like go back to the time of Nixon when LSD was criminalized, because people that were on LSD had incredible visions and stuff. It opened your mind. And that was disruptive to the system. Look what happened with Vietnam. The anti-war movement started around that time, and it started with the hippies that were all high all the time because it opens your mind. You're less prone to be conditioned by a system that just wants you to fit in the system, that does just wants you as a soldier in the system. So anything that expands your mind, of course, was criminalized in that time. And there's whole documentaries about that on Netflix and stuff, where when that happened and how that happened. And alcohol is a depressant. Alcohol makes us feel like, oh well, I can't be bothered, or justifies, like, oh yeah, but I said that, but I was drunk, so that doesn't really matter. It justifies crap. That is not justifiable. And so I think alcohol is a means. Like look at Netflix these days. Like James Bond used to drink one little whatever he had, one of those things. Now,
All I remember is shaken, not stirred. That's all I remember.
but now when you watch Netflix, they're gushing down tumblers of scotch, not a little bit, not a shot, but tumblers full. And it goes in a pace that I'm thinking, like, we are fed all those subliminal, well, barely subliminal, but actually they're just marketing alcohol all the time to you. And it's normal. And it's just like, oh, I had a bad day. I'm coming home and I'm just getting a glass of wine because I want to forget the day. Right? It's constantly. And I think this goes back to the self-care question that you asked. Self-care to me is deciding who you want to be in this world and then having your actions be congruent with that decision. I chose one day and over time and every day again to be a kind person. Now, kindness is not nice. They're very different things. They're used intertwined and interchangeable, but they're not at all the same. I can say something that is quite unkind, but might actually, or quite unnice, not nice, but might actually be the kindest thing that I can do at that moment to wake you up or to address a racist comment that happened or whatever, right? Might not be nice because it's confrontational, but kindness is sometimes very confrontational because certain things just need to be said. And if I don't say those things, I'm part of it. Like, for example, if there's a racist comment, and if I don't say anything, I'm unkind to myself because I am now part and let a racist comment happen without standing up for the person who is at the receiving end of that racist statement. I don't want to be part of that. So I have to say something because racism is not kind. So I have to, in the kindest way possible, make that person aware that that's not an acceptable statement because it's over the back of somebody else, and nothing that is over the back of somebody else can be justified. Freedom over the back of other people is not freedom. Freedom of speech at the expense of other persons is not freedom of speech. It's harassment. It's insulting. And my freedom is more linked to responsibilities. And if you go back to Indigenous values, freedom is not. There's responsibility to live, that we're all part of a community, because the well-being of the community is more important than my individual needs. Well, this colonial system has completely done it the other way. I've been taught that I can drive a Maserati, take and become wildly rich because you don't make millions, you take millions. But I'm still celebrated as a great businessman. I'm celebrated as a celebrity, as somebody who made it. We celebrate criminals in this society. That's criminal if you take billions at the expense of workers in a factory that don't get paid for shit and all that crap. That's taking money. It comes at an expense of people. That's not freedom. That's criminal.
I totally agree.
So why do we celebrate those people? That's beyond me.
Yeah. And I think, I was talking to someone a couple months ago actually, it was probably about a year ago now, and we were talking about the Black Lives Matter movement. And I said, this is even deeper than that. This whole country in the US was started off of stealing land from the indigenous.
Yes.
This whole country was literally built on consumerism and capitalism and taking.
Yes.
And racism. So to think that it started with slavery, it didn't start with slavery. This country was birthed from that.
Yes.
And I've heard some people go, well, let's go back to the Constitution. Well, but the Constitution was an idealized version. We have never lived into the Constitution. Never.
The Constitution was made by white guys.
And it was. Right.
Seriously.
And if you looked who created it in the first place, it was
I
white
know.
men that had slaves, so many of them, So it's look at the source of where it came from.
Exactly.
And that's why I find the Hofstede model that I referenced earlier really interesting because different countries operate in different ways. And in some ways, the Netherlands are similar to us, but in other ways, they're very different. And I think some of the South American countries are more feminine based rather than masculine, in that they really value the collective and we and us over an individual. So they will place the tribe and the community long before they'll place one individual,
Yeah. But
which is interesting.
that's also why when treaties are made, for example, were made, there's just a conflict of, again, if you don't talk about the power structures, the values of indigenous cultures about land ownership, they don't have land ownership. There is
Right.
stewardship of the land because you need to be in regenerative and balanced way with nature. You can't take more than you need
It
because
has to be collaborative.
exactly it has to be collaborative and you can't just take. They don't measure a tree to have more value after it's cut because the tree is a being in a forest, and old growth is important to have that whole system be a regenerative and healthy system. Indigenous peoples understood that and lived in balance and in harmony. What, not harmony as in nothing happens, but in a regenerative way with and respect to what they took in in a way that it's sustainable for the next 7 generations. They didn't live for themselves. They don't live for themselves. And those values are, I mean, I don't know if you know the book Indigenomics from
I don't, but I will definitely look it up.
that is definitely a book that you have to look up. Carol Ann Hilton, she's an indigenous woman and who wrote a book Indigenomics. And she has a few pages like this, where you have the indigenous worldview and the Western mainstream worldview side by side on different issues.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, for example, on the concept of ownership, right? And this is where, when the treaties are created, they actually talk different languages because the whole value system on stewardship of the land versus having deeds and stealing land were not compatible. And then the people with the power just took it, stole the land, created those treaties, abused the treaties still to date, and don't live by those treaties. But for example, the concept of ownership in the Western mainstream view is individual and rights-based rights, not duties to community, but your individual rights. Fee simple, so it's a structure. It's linear, contract-based, because that makes lawyers rich, right? Polarized concept of ownership based on authority and responsibility is externalized within law. Again, the lawyers thrive. Ownership in the indigenous worldview is ownership can be collective. Rights extends across generations and is connected to stewardship. Rights means responsibility, not ownership. Ownership is not singular. Everyone has a vested interest, including nature and earth, connected to all living things, because we are all living things. And so if those two parties meet to create a treaty, you can imagine that they don't hear each other.
Right.
They have completely different value systems. You can, without translating one to the other or explaining what's actually happening, you can't have anything on the colonial contractual treaty way because it actually did, like, ownership was experienced so different.
Right. The value language
They
is
talked about this
completely
and they
opposite.
talked about that, and that was put in the treaty. So they didn't understand that their land was now stolen
Right.
because the values are so different. This is a fantastic book, Indigenomics, and she also
Yeah, I
does
will
workshops.
definitely check that out. And I think what's really interesting is that as a concept too, when you take it into business. So for you running Alinker. Is it Alinker or
The
Alinker?
anchor is fine. Yeah.
Alinker. Okay. I don't know why I got so
And I
caught up
don't
in
care
those
really. Yeah.
semantics. But Alinker is a global company and now it's a B Corp. So you have all these, contractual things that you have to run the company by.
Do we? I don't have contracts.
Okay, well,
I mean,
so
where I legally have
certification for
Right.
B Corp.
Yes, and the next time I might not want to be certified anymore. Because
Got
if
it.
I have to prove that people are really poor that I'm serving, I'm not in the business of proving that my people are really poor. It's bad enough that this system drives people into poverty. The moment you are diagnosed with MS, lose your job, lose your colleagues, lose your partner, because that's too uncomfortable, lose your income, and then lose your social networks. And then you got all those medical bills over your ears. We drive people into poverty. So I have to prove that they're really poor.
What do you bring? Sorry, finish your sentence.
So if I have to prove that they're really poor, I don't do that. So I can't score points there. Because the whole system of B Corp is improving on the system that is racist, sexist, and ableist. I don't want to improve that system. I want to build a new way for and by people, for all of us, no one excluded. That's very different than trying to fix all the problems. And I always say, like, as long as you look at a problem, all you see is a problem. Why on earth would you do that? There's nothing attractive in staring at a problem. And there's nothing attractive in fixing something that actually wasn't a problem, but it was a symptom of that system.
Right.
If that system continues to spew out the same waste that we identify as problems, it only tells us how sophisticated the system is in conditioning us to focus on the problems to fix and deceiving us because they're not problems. But as long as we focus on the problems to try and fix them, we're stuck in a system that continues to create those problems. We're lost. We're very lost. And so many people suffer and everybody seems to be okay with it, or we're complaining, but we don't really know what to do anymore because we have lost the power to mobilize, to be in community. And I feel that we desperately need to link back to the values, not go back to like that argument is often used by people like, oh, you want to go us back to, you want us to go back to live in the bush? It's like, that's not the point.
No, I hear you. I hear
You
you.
know,
It's going back to an old value system that was there and all about connection and
it's not,
a part of something bigger than yourself.
yes, it's old and it's alive right now. Indigenous people are not eradicated.
Right.
They are still here. And
Did you know there was a study in 2018 that asked people whether or not Indigenous people were extinct? And I think it was like 40% or 60% thought they were.
yeah, because that's the narrative. That's what the system was meant to do. And hailing people, Indigenous people, for being resilient is really disgusting too, because no one should have to be that resilient to survive the crap and the crimes that have happened and are continuous to continue to happen to Indigenous people. But the values of being part of the value of the community, the living not just for yourself, but for the next generations as we come through 7 generations. There's a wisdom in the intergenerational thing that we've completely eradicated. When I tell people in Afghanistan, like, we shove our old people in a home, and then if they're lucky, we come and visit them once a week. You know what Afghans tell me from one of the poorest countries in the world? They said, you need help. I was like, no, but this is the thing. The values in Afghanistan are very like the values that Indigenous people live with, because ultimately we are all somewhere Indigenous people. We just lost our way with a capitalistic colonial system that industrialized and only measured in money. And now we're completely lost. We have lost our souls and we are killing ourselves. We're not in a climate crisis. We're in an existential crisis because we are dying, all of us. It's not a climate crisis. That's just a crap out, because the climate is not in crisis. I mean, the climate on this planet has gone through whatever things. We're in crisis. We're about to die. And oh, we can't talk about dying. Oh yeah, I remember, we can't talk about dying. Now we've got a real problem. So now we crap out and all that shit on all the drama of the ocean is full of plastic and the forests are all on fire and all that stuff. It's drama. Because what do traumatized people do? They look for drama. When I came out of 10 years international work and had PTSD that I didn't know, I sought out a relationship that was constantly filled with drama, because that kept my adrenaline levels up. So everywhere where I see drama, it's like, what's the trauma underneath there? Because it's not about the drama. It's not about trying to fix the problems. This is not a problem to fix. Who do we want to be, knowing that we fucked up dramatically? We, as in the whole capitalistic, anybody who signed up to the colonial capitalistic system, we fucked up.
Yeah.
A food system that makes us sick. And knowingly, we eat the food that knowingly makes us sick. And then we go to the sick care system and say, like, I want a cure. I don't want to move more or eat better. I want to just have a cure. The right to comfort that this white supremacist system has taught us. Not very healthy.
You know, that when both my uncle and my grandfather passed away from brain cancer, and I was by my grandfather's side as he was transitioning for 3 weeks. And it taught me a lot, much like you've described about death. Although I was older, I was in my 30s, and I'm still in my 30s, but it was 6 years ago. And it was profound because I learned so much about life in that experience. And when my uncle was in the hospital, I remember watching the food they would serve him and thinking,
Mm.
none of this is right.
Sick
And
cares.
and he wanted right, and he wanted ice cream. And I kept telling him no, and my grandmother brought him ice cream anyway. And the nurses would dutifully scoop it out for him and give him ice cream several times a day. And I thought, there's research after research after research after research and studies after studies that show sugar, especially refined sugar, feeds cancer. And here is a patient that has cancer, and they're feeding him the very thing that increases its spread. And this is super common. It's super common.
Why we get cancer in the first place.
Right. Right.
Well,
Right.
acknowledge that food is medicine. So we continue to do that.
Because we have this, under this illusion that we're separate from nature
And then
rather
we
than we are
feed,
part of it.
exactly. And then we feed the whole research to try and find a cure. There's no cure for this stuff. You just need to go back to where it started going wrong.
Yes. So with that, we'll land this plane here in just a minute. I could talk to you for hours, V. This is just there's so many things that we could tease out and unpack. And it's really beautiful being in conversation with you.
Mm.
We've talked about and briefly touched on food and native ways and wisdom and language. I'm a firm believer that being an entrepreneur is being sovereign in how you run things, being able to earn and generate an income that you can then spend in different ways than what is maybe prescribed for a global company. How do you take those values into the business and allow it to transform into something else? If that question makes sense.
It's the same values that apply to me. And there's people that are attracted to us that say, like, one of the reasons that I want to buy an Alinker is because what you stand for as a company. And other people are like, I don't want to be part of this. She's a freak. And that's fine. And it's not about me, but it's about the essence of who we are as a company. We do speak up about stuff, and everything is political. People say, like, oh, you shouldn't mix with politics as a company. I was like, the killing of George Floyd is politics. And yes, as a company, I do need to speak out on all issues that arise in a society that has all those problems, because the politics are only serving a few. So yes, as a company, I want to have a voice about everything that undermines justice,
Mm,
because that ultimately drives the Alinker. When my mother said, "Over my dead body, will I ever use one of those things?" and pointing at some folks on the plaza that had electric scooters and rollators and whatever, I realized that medical devices emphasize the disability, therefore creating a social divide between people with and without disabilities. And that instantly became a justice issue for me. That's where the Alinker started, as a justice issue. So anywhere where I see a system that creates injustice or that is built on injustice, of course I'm going to have a voice about that. Not against the system, but as a sort of awareness, like that's what the system does. I don't want to be part of that. I don't want to try and fix it either, because it doesn't want to be fixed. I want to build something new. And so the values that drive me to the one choice, the one decision to be a kind person, and then repeatedly make that same decision, and then live everything that I do. What is the kindest response that I can have right now? Not always easy. And it's very often not easy to be kind, because many of the practices around us are not kind. So how do I be as kind as possible at any time? And of course, you can't be perfect, because that's another characteristics of white supremacy. You have to be perfect. And one of the things that we do talking about characteristics of white supremacy is often have in our team meeting a check-in, like, how did white supremacy show up for you? There's like 12 characteristics of white supremacy. It's us and them, either or, right to comfort, perfectionism, urgency, like all those things we're conditioned with that.
Yes.
And so the question to the team sometimes is like, how did white supremacists go, oh, I forgot to slow down and be in relation. And I just forced an issue because I wanted an urgent answer. It's like, oh yeah. And then what happens? But the moment you're aware of those things and practice those things in the team, that might not be comfortable. Who cares for comfort? Comfort kills you. The state of comfort is death. Oh yeah, we can't talk about that. But yet we're constantly looking for the state of comfort. Sort of wild, isn't it?
Yes. Like I said, there are so many things. I hope that you will come back and we can do another round of conscious conversation and dig into some of these more. There are some things I didn't touch on just for the sake of, I just wanted to relate to each other in what we were in and allow the conversation to flow as it was going to flow. Maybe another time we can talk about how your relationship with Selma Blair changed the trajectory of the Alinker. I'm really fascinated by this concept of running a business in this kind of system that we've talked about throughout this conversation, but at the same time, deeply valuing these old wise values, these old systems that are actually way more effective by seeing us in collaboration with life and with what is. As we stand in that more powerfully as leaders, then we activate other people to do the same thing. And to me, that's hugely important in my life and a huge motivating force of waking people up to be in their own sovereignty and their own uniqueness and their own creative genius and their zones of genius. And at the same time, recognizing their impact on others and their community and the people that they care about. So all those things being at play. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, because I see you as one of those people. So what would, as we close out our time together, what advice would you give to young entrepreneurs or new entrepreneurs that are coming into the space that maybe aspire to be a B Corp or do something with social change? What advice would you give them?
Understand who you want to be and then live by it. And your company, by extension, is the same thing. Don't try to help anything. Don't try to change the world, because check your power dynamics. Who are you to help others? Who are you to change the world? The arrogance of that, changing the world. What? Who are we to change the world? All I can do is like, there's nothing in this world that's attractive to me. I can build a new attraction. Imagine and dream. Those are the most disruptive things that you can do. Because if I imagine something and I talk about it dreaming and whatever, people say, oh my God, that's attractive. That's so attractive. to the point, like disability is not attractive, right? People are like, oh, that's uncomfortable and don't want to talk about that. Don't know how to say that. Can I more? But a while ago, we had a woman call me, and we had a few actually, but that woman was very clear. She was like, I have to apologize. I don't have a disability, but I'd like to be part of your community. Is that possible? Then you fuck with the assumptions about disability. And that's exactly. So you can create something that is so attractive because people are acknowledged for who they are. If people are not acknowledged, they don't exist. And this system disregards people, dismisses people that are not acknowledged anymore. They get really mad and they have no power. But it's a ticking time bomb. The moment it's like the moment you spark it, boom, you can just wait for it because people are madder than hell. And for very good reasons, because they've been dismissed and trampled on, driven into poverty, driven into, areas where redlining and we call them food deserts. No food deserts. They're designed to have people eat crap from 7-Eleven and then get sick and have very high prevalences of all those sicknesses.
Because again, it keeps them dependent on the system.
Exactly.
So the system can continue.
So be aware who you are, what you're actually trying to do, and question yourself constantly. Like if I tried to change the world, what is actually happening? If I try to help somebody, what is actually happening? What's underneath there? Never take things for what they are. Always be curious. I'm intensely curious. I think that drives that I never take anything that I see for granted. Like always like, I see drama. What's the trauma underneath there? So I can show up with my kindest me. Because if I just respond to the drama, I'm just in the drama. If I'm willing to like, what's the trauma underneath there? I can show up with the kindness that I'd like to show up with.
That's beautiful, B. I remember when I had spoken to you a few years ago, I asked what you wanted your legacy to be. And you were like, I don't give a shit about a legacy. When I'm dead, I'm dead.
And I still don't give a shit about that.
And it was such an honest and authentic response that I realized in that moment there was no pretense about you. Like here you were running the Alinker and building this product that's really incredible, doing great things. It's a global company. You're speaking on stages. That's where I met you. And you're incredibly accessible and you haven't lost any part of who you are internally. Like it didn't transfer into ego. And I just want to say publicly that I have a ton of respect for who you are and how you show up and what you do in the world.
Thank you. Yeah, I live by, we close it off and then we start up again.
I know.
But I live by, my grandma was from a very poor family and we were the first to sort of come out of that. But I was raised by a very poor grandma. And she had values that I still look by. And I continue to be who I am. And it doesn't matter what circumstances, whether I'm rich or poor, or I will not change because I chose to be a kind person. And then certain things automatically cannot happen because it's not kind. So I'll never be a rich person because accumulating wealth is taking it from another place. To give a little example, when at the beginning of the pandemic, when you see Yo Network, some ventures overnight lost all their customers and were just gone or were about to go bankrupt. We just had a fantastic year with the Alinker. And I see money as nutrients. Money is not money. It's not mine anyway. They're nutrients that need to flow. It's called currency for a reason. It needs to be in flow, right? And so I had a lot of nutrients in my fridge, so to speak. And then others needed nutrients to pay their staff. Some of the staff was homeless, but the venture actually employed homeless people. And she was just weeping, saying like, how can I put people that are already homeless on the street just because the pandemic broke out? And I was like, how much do you need to pay their salaries? And they started paying the payroll. No strings attached because it's just nutrients that need to flow. I didn't lose anything. I might have spent tens of thousands of dollars on a few companies that just needed nutrients. That didn't make me any less. If anything, that made us more because we were in community and we made sure that nobody had to go bankrupt.
When I think that's the difference of when you're in relationships rather than transactional ones.
Exactly. But we're relational creatures. We're not transactional creatures. We have
Right.
no idea who we are when there's only transactions. That only makes the lawyers rich because you need a contract that needs to, if anything goes wrong, this will happen. Why not? We don't have a contract with the guy who makes the Alinkers in Taiwan. We don't have a contract. If we had a contract, we would have been long dead because there were payment terms. And at a certain time, we owed him $450,000. And I said, Nick, I'm like, he said, don't worry. I know this is going to happen. I'm with you.
Wow.
He's
You know,
with us, still with us.
I have a friend that is an actor that's been in acting for over 40 years. And I had heard someone ask him once, what advice would you have to a new actor? And he said, know who you are before you
No,
come into this industry.
that's all that matters.
And it doesn't matter what industry you're in.
It doesn't matter.
When you're going to be a leader in something, or you're going to go out into the world, or you're just being human, know who
But,
you are.
but if you're a kid, what was the question that was always asked?
What are you going to be? Who are you going to
What
be?
do you, exactly. And always a specialist in something, and always an astronaut or a doctor or whatever, something outrageously specialist. That's, and as a kid, I was like, why did they ask me what I want to be? As if my career determines what kind of human I'm going to be. That's insane. I thought the question should be, who do I want to be? And that still is the leading question in my life. And that is my practice that I always build. So the reverse design practice, like not focusing on problems, seeing that they're symptoms of the system and not trying to change the world, change you. Because I'm very powerful in what I want to choose. I don't need to live in the scarcity that makes me feel small. I am extremely powerful by eating plant-based food. And even though cancer might be in my genes, both my parents died of cancer, I can turn that gene on and off with the stuff that I'm eating. I'm extremely powerful, but I found my power because here I am powerful. And I'm not there in the system, what the system wants me to be, or the system forces me into some kind of minority thing. I don't live in that world. Sometimes people think like, oh, B, you think so much out of the box. And I was like, I recognize that you live in a box, but it's not my box.
Right. Instead of you being the one that's outside the box, it's
Yeah,
just that they're seeing themselves inside one.
it's not my box. I do think that there's a set of conditioning happening with that system. And some of this I'm conditioned with for sure. So it's up to me to uphold that system with my conditioning, i.e., making me part of a criminal system. I don't want to uphold a system that's criminal. So it's up to me to get out of it and to have my practices represent kindness and not upholding a white supremacist system that's criminal. Who do you want to be? And then live accordingly. And it's simple. It's really simple. You're in full power. Who do you want to be? And that guides everything that you do.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for being here, B.
You're welcome. That was a nice conversation.